Welcome, guys. First of all, thoughts and prayers to people who are affected by DACA. One could definitely say they were thrown a curveball, just like Moses, and we'll be talking about that today. First off, we have Adriana Martinez. Woo! All right, then we've got Brady. You're gonna clap the whole time you're walking in.
Time.
All right,
Okay.
then we've got John. John, come on down, John. And then finally we have our contestant Grace as well. And we're going to be talking about Moses and his story. I'm going to go ahead and back up a little bit. Alright, let me pull up the number one question real quick. Alright, what are the similarities and contrasts between infant Moses and infant Jesus? Well, my 2 cents are similarity-wise, they were both born to pretty poor families. What else do y'all guys think?
Well, as infants, they wanted to be murdered. Or they didn't want to. The
True.
king wanted to murder them.
Yeah.
A king.
Let's speak a
There's
little
a
bit louder,
lot.
though.
And then they were both Hebrews.
Yes, both of them were born into Hebrew families.
Yeah.
Anything on this side?
Well, one of them was put in a manger and the other one was put in the river in a basket.
True,
so
that is one of the contrasts. What was another one?
I guess they both grew up to be a type of leader.
Yeah.
Yes. One of them became an Egyptian, the other one became the son of God. So, that is also another contrast between the two of them.
Well, I meant more of like they're still leaders of Hebrews.
Yeah.
True, true. Alright, we're going to go ahead and just move on to the next question, though. Why did the Egyptians oppress the Hebrews? From a strategical point of view, the Hebrews were outnumbering the Egyptians by quite a bit. And so the Egyptians took advantage of that and saw them as a workforce. And so in order to break their will and spirit, they made them slaves.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Anyone want to add anything to it?
I think one thing that is kind of easy to overlook, but is a big part of it, is that the Hebrews were God's chosen people, and so I mean that was kind of a part of the plan in the first place, was for them to be oppressed and spend a lot of time being oppressed, because that's just that was just a part of God's plan, with the creation and the fall and so on.
Well, then, how did they oppress them? What are some ways that they did that?
Well, they obviously took away their willpower. They had to work every single day, and they weren't fed very much, and they were expected to just follow whatever they said, just because they believed in something different.
Going back to God's plan, throughout the movie, they always kept saying that the chosen one will come and lead us out of this misery. And so, I guess that was a curveball that it was Moses, who everybody thought was Egyptian.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like mentioning that the chosen one's going to come out and deliver us and free us from you awful people, and made the Egyptians even more angry towards them. That's
Yeah.
further cause for them to oppress them.
Even scared that maybe it would work out for them,
True, true. And other ways they oppressed them is they eliminated their the first, not firstborn, but the 2-year-old males. Anybody.
And under.
anybody- So they wouldn't have no more guys to fight against them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then, as we saw, that really shocked the mom in that one scene. They just came in and killed her baby.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
She's speechless, pretty much.
That would be pretty traumatic, though.
yeah. So, yeah. All right, question 3. Describe the Egyptians' attitude and manner of behavior towards the Hebrews.
Man, I think they're pretty relentless.
Yes.
I mean, they didn't
Yeah.
care. They would throw blows whenever, and it was just kind of pretty crazy.
Especially when the old lady was trapped in the rocks, they didn't even stop.
Yeah.
They were we don't stop for old ladies, and they were we need to get the work done. They cared about what was being built more than their actual human lives.
Well, I imagine if it had been the Egyptian woman, they would have stopped. But since it was
Yeah.
a Hebrew, they didn't care. Just keep working, keep going. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, the old ladies couldn't do anything, so they didn't have any use for them.
True.
Yeah.
But even if it had been a guy, I still think they would have been the same thing. Just keep going.
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Another
They
thing.
just
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
They just their whole mindset is just to build and to do what the king tells them to. They don't really care about human life.
The other thing was they didn't have to be that ruthless. Moses, when everybody thought he was an Egyptian, he still showed compassion towards them, even though he didn't even know he was one of them.
Yeah.
And he never got in trouble for it or anything.
True. I mean, they were working them, they were starving them, and then he comes in and feeds them all. And they might have been a little angry, like, hey, why are you feeding our slaves? But at the same time, he's like, well, I mean, if you're going to have a workforce, they have to be strong. You can't just starve them to death.
And that's
So.
why he gave him that one day out of the 7 off.
And then he gave them the grain from their altar.
Which was definitely strange for an Egyptian to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks in a way just because, like, for the Egyptians, like, honestly, the Hebrews, like, they didn't care. Like, they were nothing to them. Like, even, like, whenever they found out that Moses was a Hebrew, like, it instantly just got rid of all of his credibility.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't matter what he had done up to that point. Since they found he was a Hebrew, he was nothing to them.
Yeah.
So. I
That's
think
pretty significant what he's done. Like, he's made alliances with the whole African tribe just on words alone.
And like he built the whole city, and he the king was going to put him in rule over his own like blood son. So that's how much they liked him before.
All right, question 4. How did Moses' attitude change when he discovered he was a Hebrew instead of an Egyptian?
I don't know, you could kind of tell he was starting to think he might believe in the Hebrew God, since everyone was telling him he would, eventually, feel bad about what he'd done as Pharaoh, or under Pharaoh. But
Yeah.
And he felt a lot more sympathetic, like whenever he went out and started working with them, seeing how they were living their lives.
Yeah. I feel like he probably wanted to know his origins because, like when you grow up your whole life thinking you're someone and then you find out you're not, then you like are like, well, what am I really? So he was probably searching for that, and that's why he followed his fake mother to his real mother, and
So that also probably explains why he was so accepting of it.
yeah.
Like one scene he's dressed in all Egyptian gear, and then the next he's walking around a slave.
True. Well, I think it's interesting though, is it says, how did his attitude change when he discovered he was a Hebrew and Egyptian? But like in the movie, it shows how he's just, I'm a Hebrew now, Like he's not like completely like just, I'm a Hebrew, what am I gonna do? He's just like, I'm still the same Moses.
Yeah, like
Whether-
he was like, it's the same hands, the same arms, and he was saying like, there's no shame on me, there's no shame on you, to his mother. So
Yeah.
I feel like he didn't really feel like he changed as a person, but he still wanted to know like what he missed out on.
Well, and then like, he actually started paying attention to the slave masters and how they treated his people. I mean, he ended up killing one of them. As an Egyptian, I don't think he would have done that. But as a Hebrew, he's like, I gotta fight for my brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an attitude change in him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely as an Egyptian, he probably just would have taken his whip away, said enough is enough, I have more power than you.
Yeah.
he'd say.
True.
And also if we go back to number 3, describing the Egyptians' attitudes, like once he became a Hebrew, like y'all said, he lost all credibility, but that just shows that Egyptians only looked at like their own kind. It didn't matter what kind of person Moses was his whole entire life,
Yeah.
because all of them knew Moses growing up, and then this one little piece of information and none of who he really is mattered to them anymore.
True. All right. Which had more freedom, the Egyptian Moses or the Hebrew Moses? So let's start off with the Egyptian Moses. Anybody think he had more freedom?
in a way,
Yeah.
I mean, he could do whatever he wanted because he had a lot of power. But then again, he didn't know God, so you can't really. I mean, you can't really live freely without knowing God.
Yeah, like
Yes.
going back to like our first discussion in class, like how we talked about the difference between freedom and slavery. A lot of like the definitions that we had for that was like freedom is having the ability to choose what you believe in, and I feel like he didn't really have that ability to choose because he didn't know the other half. So like all he knew was his king, and that's all he knew to serve, and then the gods that his king worshipped. And so I feel like that goes back to that first thing, and how like an absence of knowledge is limiting to your freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Like in a way, it can kind of be like there was freedom in both, but probably more freedom in Hebrew Moses because, like you said, when he was an Egyptian, he could do pretty much everything. He ruled over everybody. But if you think about it, like, he, like, really embraced being a Hebrew and, he was willing to work with them and, like, be on their level. And I think that, there's a lot of freedom in embracing that. And then I think had he decided to keep it a secret or something like that, he probably would have felt a lot of guilt. And when you feel that type of way, like, you're definitely not free.
Yeah.
Well, I think as like a Hebrew, he's able to be himself. Like as an Egyptian, he had to, I don't know, he had to take other people's orders. Even so he could do what he wanted, he still had to take other people's orders. He had like certain like guidelines of restrictions that he'd be in. As a Hebrew, not so much because he's not really trying to impress anybody. I guess it kind of sounds wrong, but anyway, like, and then like later on in the story, I mean, it's just him wandering around, and then later he's with God. So like as a Hebrew, like meeting like God and stuff, like he's more free, and then later on he's liberating the Hebrews, and then they're all free. So as a Hebrew, he experiences more freedom than if he was an Egyptian.
Yeah. And I think also part of like the whole storyline is like while he was an Egyptian king, like he was in Egypt, like in the palace, and then like later he freed them and like parted the Red Sea and they left. So like I feel like that's kind of like an analogy in and of itself. Like he stayed in Egypt right there, and then whenever he found out he was a Hebrew, he had the opportunity to leave and be free.
True.
As an Egyptian, like you said, he had those, it was freedom, but within this certain range. So it's kind of like that false freedom. Like when we had that first discussion back in class, and that one girl mentioned how that's kind of how public schools are. They say this is your freedom to wear this clothing, like your own clothing, but then they're like, but then you can't do this, and that.
Yeah.
Well, and like other people's opinions, like on him, had a lot more influence as an Egyptian. Like he had to make sure he was like in the law, like he was impressing people like his king. Like if he wanted to inherit the kingdom, he has to impress the king. So like making the tall tower for the city, that was impressive. But then even more impressive was making a statue to the king. Because like once the king saw that statue, he's like, oh, Moses, you're the best. Now if Ramses had made that statue, he would have given Ramses all the love. So like in a way, like Egyptian Moses having to fight for his freedom, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. What was the Egyptian reaction to Moses' identity as a Hebrew?
They were kind of just like disappointed, like, oh, you're one of them. Like, how have you made it this far in our like society?
True.
I think they were all like really shocked too, though, because they like I remember like the scene when he like opened through the doors. There was like a whole bunch of gasps, and they're like Moses, and then I think Ramses was like looking for he was looking for something to ruin Moses because he knew that Moses was gonna take his place, and so like because he was looking for it, that's how he found out the information, and like that's why he exposed him. So Ramses was really happy that Moses' identity came out, and also because he knew that he would win back his like father's approval and stuff. So.
Well, and then like just like the whole back to the scene, like Moses is a Hebrew, and everyone's all shocked and everything. Like it's like such a great guy, they wouldn't expect him to be a Hebrew, which I think speaks volumes. Like in order to be a good guy, you have to be Egyptian.
Yeah.
Like since he's a Hebrew, he's not that great of a guy anymore. And so, and then like whenever people found out he was a Hebrew, they were like, oh, you need to hide it. Stay an Egyptian. Don't let people know you're a Hebrew. Like even his own mom who raised him is like, yeah, no, you need to stay as Egyptian. Don't say you're a Hebrew, even though it's your true heritage. Don't do that, because then you'll ruin your life, your future, how you're gonna live.
Even though in fact, showing who he was, that was actually keeping it a secret was actually the opposite. Because she was like, oh, you'll have this great life. You're gonna ruin your life, but by keeping it a secret, he was actually ruining his life instead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
True. Okay. If you faced a similar situation to Moses, would you acknowledge your true identity from or would you keep it a secret? We're gonna start with Adriana. What would you do?
I don't know. That's the hard one, really, because you would like to say that you do the right thing and acknowledge your identity, which is I like to acknowledge my identity, like who I am and everything. But I mean, it's a different story if you're like a ruler over
It's not
a
oppressing
land, you know.
thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, so I mean, he pretty much had the freedom to do whatever he wanted, you know. So I mean, that's kind of hard, you know. Like when you could potentially, you know, inherit, you know, a lot of land, you know. It's like, I don't really know, you know. I really couldn't tell you right now. That's a hard one.
Brady?
I don't know. I mean, if you're in that situation and the king or the pharaoh's already pretty old, you know, you could just kind of fake it till you make it a little longer, and then for sure free all of your people. Like, once you're pharaoh.
Okay.
So I mean, that's probably what I would do, honestly.
I'd say I'd probably keep it a secret, just because even though Hebrew is my true heritage, I mean, you've been raised an Egyptian your whole life, so I mean, what's wrong with saying that you're an Egyptian, you know? It's like, I mean, you know, you got people from Mexico coming over to U.S., so we treat them as a U.S. citizen. Their true heritage is Mexico, but they're a U.S. citizen now. So same thing with, you know, Moses. He might have been a Hebrew, but now he's an Egyptian. So, like, I wouldn't feel bad keeping that title, I'm an Egyptian. Plus, he's the second in command, so he has a lot of power. So, like you just said, you know, when the king's gone, he becomes the new ruler. You can definitely, you know, take it off the Hebrews, because he's one of them. So he can definitely make it to where the labor is not so intense. You know, take away the slave part of it and just make it to where they work for him, not necessarily, like, because they have to, because they want to, I guess. I don't know, so he could definitely, like, help out the Hebrews in the way, like, keeping that authority position. Because, I mean, like, his ancestors, you know, like, Jacob, he became the ruler of Egypt. So, I mean, he definitely could as a Hebrew. And then, like, it's just a title, though. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. What about you?
For me, I think I would also go with the long con. I just kind of hold out. But it also just boils down to having strong faith. Like, I'm still human. Who am I to rewrite God's plan? He said he has something better. Like, then even if, like, I were to stay, become king, and then let all the slaves be free, and then live in this wonderful city and this great land of Egypt, it's God said that there's something better for them than this land. So even if they were free, they still have a better option. And so I guess it's just having faith that by giving all these material things up, something much greater is going to come from it.
I think like the easiest option would obviously be to like keep it a secret. So I feel like for me, like, I don't really know what I would do, because it'd be really hard to like to give everything up, especially when he just found out like the day before, and so I feel like it was like a really big shock for him. So I feel like for me the same shock would happen, but the easier version would be to keep it a secret, and the harder version would be, for him, it would be like trusting in a God that he doesn't even know yet. And so like that would be even harder. So like for him to do that and to like tell the truth to the king, that like says a lot about his character, that he is already believing in a God that he just found out about the other day. And so like for me, I don't know what I would do, but it would be a really hard decision. I don't know if I'd make it like right away. So
Well, then, just like from the Hebrew side of it, if you acknowledge your true heritage, I feel like you can definitely live with your life better, knowing that yes, I am a Hebrew, and not trying to fake it. And then like, well, I mean, there's a lot more Hebrews, so not acknowledging that he was a Hebrew, he had a bigger family, plus his own actual family with, you know, his brother and sister and his mother. So like getting to actually know these are your real siblings, not these people, and then, because I mean, not that the Egyptians didn't love him, but like his Hebrew family definitely loves him. So I mean, you'd be going back to your true family, true heritage. Plus, an advantage if he identifies as Hebrew, you know, he gets to learn about the actual God, not the fake Egyptian ones like Anubis and stuff. But yeah, so there's definitely advantages to both.
I just thought of something. Don't know why it came to me, but if you kind of think about it, it's almost like it was like foreshadowed that he was a Hebrew, you know, because he was always different from the Egyptians with the way that he treated everybody. So it was like he kind of had that Hebrew in him, just you know, to begin with, because he had a different heart than everybody else did.
Yeah, and the whole kingdom noticed it because he was praised for being compassionate, and I guess they were liking the qualities of the Hebrew in him without realizing he was Hebrew, and then when they realized he was Hebrew, it was like all those qualities went down the drain.
It's crazy, you know, how they praise it until they find out that, oh, it's Hebrew, you know?
Yeah.
It's
really
funny.
interesting.
It's funny that they're praising a Hebrew until they know he's Hebrew.
Yeah.
Well, like that brings up a good point, because like he, like in the very beginning, he brings over Ethiopia as an ally for Egypt. Like, oh, you trying to turn against me with this other army? He's like, no, I just got you an ally.
Yeah.
You know, so like, I guess like the Egyptians are more like self-centered, like, you know, it's all about us, and he's like, oh, here's your ally. Like they're always thinking like the worst outcome. You know.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Based on society standards today, which group do you identify with the most? The Egyptians or the Hebrews? Anybody want to go first?
Society standards.
Well, I feel like that's like a hard question because it's not so cut and dry like that. Like, it's not so like Egyptians who rule over the Hebrews. There's like people in between too. So I feel like there's people that like see what's happening and don't do anything about it, and then there's like, 'cause like in this story, like the Hebrews can't do anything about it, and so there's like people who can do something about it. It's their choice to do it or not, and so I don't really know where I stand. Like, I don't think I'm an Egyptian, but like I don't know if I'm like all the way fighting for the Hebrews, you know. So yeah, that's my standpoint.
I think nowadays it's not so much like one's above the other. Like you have a whole bunch of like little like,
levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like even like just throughout the day, like you don't really have someone oppressing you, but you know there's always some dick that's like, you know, always just oppressed, just going around like bullying people just a little bit. Like I don't know. I think that's a lot, like just every day.
I'd say I argue against that. It can be kind of cut and dry, because like America can definitely easily be related to Egypt. Like, first of all, we're a really wealthy country, so like we already have a bunch of like first world problems. You know, like, oh man, I can't get Netflix to work. You know, like that's honestly like that's living rich. Like America is like one of the like top 1% richest in the world. Like, it's really close to Egypt, just like all the problems that we have, and then plus. Like, a lot of America is against refugees and people immigrating here. So same thing with Egypt. You know, they weren't exactly happy that the Hebrews were there. And so I'm not saying everybody, but there are definitely a lot of people who have that view, like, hey, you don't belong here, you need to go back.
Yeah,
Kind of like with the Egyptians. And we're not forcing them to slave labor, but we have that same kind of view, like, hey, we don't like you. And so, I mean, that's definitely a way that you could say that America is kind of like Egypt. So...
I gotta say, I'm kind of with you on that one. I think I could say I definitely probably would identify more with the Hebrews, and just, okay, obviously I'm black, but I don't say that, you know, as just like the only reason, because I mean, you see it all on Facebook and everything about people posting their videos, like, this happened with me and this cop, and nothing like that has ever happened to me. I don't really feel like I've actually experienced, like, real racism, but, I see a lot of situations where people of all different races experience, you know, that same thing, and it's just kind of like just in our country today, you know, that's what's going on right now, and I just feel like whenever I see somebody going through that, I feel for that person. So anybody who's going through a situation like that where, you know, they're being mistreated just because of who they are, like, I feel for that person, and like, you know, if you're in that situation, then you're Hebrew, you know, in my eyes. So
like events like, you know, Charlottesville.
Yeah.
Completely wrong and everything.
Yeah, I see that side of it now that you pointed out.
But I mean, I like the Hebrew side of it, like, you know, having good qualities like Moses. If being a hero means I'm like, oh, Moses, I definitely want that, because he's always looking out for his people, treating everyone fairly, you know, like you know, again with Ethiopia trying to make friends, not enemies. So
The way I look at it, when I see like Egyptians or Hebrews, I see like Egyptians as like a representation of being self-centered and greedy, and the Hebrews, like I see Moses, like everybody's saying, like just very compassionate and caring towards everyone, and like he was caring towards the slaves, and he didn't even know he was one of them. And so I guess there's a lot of temptations to have that self-centeredness and that greediness, because all of us want things in life. But it's a struggle to be a Hebrew, I guess, is the way I'm gonna say it. And I want to be a Hebrew, but it's a struggle.
I mean, I would say, if I'm honest with myself, you know, I can also identify with the Egyptians, because sometimes you just naturally tend to look down on certain people for certain reasons, and like, you know, when I have those thoughts, I try to stop myself and be like, you know, that's wrong, but you know, just naturally sometimes that happens, and it's kind of how the Egyptians were too.
but then like also like on the Hebrew side of it as well, it's like we're all Hebrews because we all believe in God, you know. So that's another thing, like being Hebrew, if that means believing in God, then I definitely want to be a Hebrew. So, and like they were very God-fearing, and they had a lot of faith in him, because they're all doing the slave labor. Instead of like cursing him, they're like, you know, hey God, come save us. And they're like, the chosen one, someone's gonna come and get us out of here. So just the amount of faith that they had as well is pretty impressive. I mean, granted, it kind of varied a little bit later with the Ten Commandments, but still, they had faith.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think going back to like, all, like what I was saying earlier, like all the levels of it, like you can still be a Hebrew and be an Egyptian, like you can still be oppressed and oppress other people. So that's why I feel like it's more complicated.
You have anything else to say, Brady, about that?
I mean, like what she was saying with you can be oppressed like the Hebrews, or you could oppress people. I mean, I know a lot of people, like you get someone like pushing down on you, so you just go to the next guy in the line and just give it to them because you're just mad because you got the rough end of the deal last time. So, I mean,
True. All right, number 9. What does this story tell us about the nature of God and the nature of human beings?
I guess that's kind of like what I was saying. The nature of human beings is usually to be greedy and self-centered, but that's why we have God to show us the right way, because the nature of God is always to be compassionate and to give what we have to others.
And then like any decision God makes is right. Whereas like the nature of human is like make the decision based off of like what you believe, what you think, and not necessarily like it's not necessarily gonna be great for everybody. You know, it's more about what benefits you. Whereas when God makes a decision, it's gonna affect a whole lot of people, and it's the right decision. So like, I mean, like with the hurricane on Houston, you know, it affected a lot of people, but it also brought a lot of Houston together. You know, like there was this video of this woman, she's trapped in her car, and a bunch of African American men come up and help her. You know, and that was just a really cool video of how the community is coming together and helping each other out. And then like, you know, so many celebrities are donating money. People are offering up places for cops to come and recovery teams. So just like you know, when God does something, it's gonna affect a lot of people in the best way. So, I think in a time when we're really divided, that brought a lot of unity.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think so too. How like, just going off what you were saying, like how human nature is like to be greedy and to only. It's not really like I want everything and I don't want these people. It's more of like, just what's best for me. Like you only have that. Most people only have the mindset of what's best for them, and it takes a lot to have the mindset that God has, which is what's best for everyone. So like, I guess like when you're like in the Hebrew point, like it's easier to be all like God fearing and like follow what He says, than because you believe in Him completely. Than if you don't believe Him all the way, then it would be easier to fall back into like humans' point of view.
Another thing I was thinking about is it's kind of like the difference between God and humans and our nature is like, so if you look at us and like think about how much celebrities get praised these days, you know, so like if you're at the top, like you get the most attention. But God doesn't see it that way. He always favors the weak, and I feel like that's kind of how he was, with the Hebrews, and like that's why he put Moses in place to, be there for them. And, Moses, who was at the top, still ended up being a Hebrew, and I just feel like that was because God favored him and he favored those people.
I feel like that's a good representation of how like celebrities are still human. Like you're saying, we see them at the top and so amazing and everything, but they're not gods. In the end of the day, they're still humans like us.
Right. And like people tend to put other people above them, like think they're all that, and God just sees everyone like at once, He doesn't see just the good parts of people and then think they're all great, It's fun.
And then I think what also is that like the nature of God is a lot harder to be living like, if you're God, to be living like Jesus. It's a lot harder to do that than it is to just accept your sin and live in that. Like it's easier just to be like, I'm human, I make mistakes, that's on me, instead of being like, no, I need to be better, I need to struggle against this. So
I think one thing that's like kind of hard for me to comprehend with this question is like, we were raised in the image, or made in the image of God, and so in a way it kind of makes me feel like we should be the opposite. We shouldn't be so greedy. But then I guess that's like, where Satan comes in, he kind of made that happen, but really we were raised, or like we were made to be like God, not the way that most of us really are.
True. Alright, and then the final question is, in what ways are Moses and Jesus' ministries similar?
Well, seems like they both came to kind of show people how to do things right, So, of course, Jesus was perfect; he never sinned, so he always did everything right. But if you look at Moses and how he always chose to do the right thing, and whenever they were mistreating the Hebrews, he was always there to stand up for them, and that's how Jesus was.
I would just say like with like God always uses the most interesting person. Moses, he's an Egyptian who's actually Hebrew, so he goes from a ruler down to a slave. So he's like, let's choose Moses to lead my people out of here. And then same thing with Jesus. He is the Son of God, born in a manger in a barn somewhere. So like just like the stories of how these people, like the most unlikely heroes, end up becoming like the saviors of lots of people. Jesus. Moses leading people across the Red Sea, saving them from the Egyptians, and then Jesus coming down and saving all of our sins. Like you wouldn't think a guy like him, a guy out of Nazareth, born in Mary and Joseph, just this regular guy. Obviously he's not a regular guy, but still, he wasn't born into royalty. He was just a average citizen, saving the world. So
That's what I was thinking too. What I was gonna say is like they both preached from the bottom of society. Like even though Moses all his life was an Egyptian and was second in command, God's plan was to bring him back down and to lead from their point of view, like from their level.
Well, and like they both started from the bottom, because Moses was born to a Hebrew, and then he became second in command in Pharaoh, and Jesus was born to just a carpenter, and he came up and did all his Jesus stuff, and and then they both died. Not died, but like went down and came back. Like Jesus died and came back, and Moses went back down to like the lower level of society and then led them all out.
Yeah, that's really true.
I
think also like going off of that is like, so like Moses like started out like he was the prince, and so like he had like everyone's love, and then so like and Jesus like when he started doing miracles, he received like everyone's love, like everyone was grateful for him. But then like when they found out, well, for Moses, like when they found out that he was a Hebrew, then everyone lost their compassion for him. And whenever the Pharisees started seeing like God performing all these miracles, they thought it was wrong, and so that's when they hung him on the cross. And so like I feel like going off like what you were saying is like they had everyone's approval and then they lost it. So that's kind of how they're similar also. But in the end, they both came out on top. So
Kind of goes going off what you said. like hard workers. Jesus,
Yeah.
you know, he washed other people's feet, you know, and then Moses, he wasn't afraid to get down and work with the Hebrews, and I also wanted to say like they both brought some type of covenant as far as like their ministries, because Moses with the 10 Commandments and Jesus brought eternal life. So
All right, well, I think that wraps this up. I just have a final question for you guys, the viewers. Jesus was a carpenter. He was a really good God, Son of God, great Jesus, Savior. But was he a good carpenter? That is a good question. Okay, that ends it. Somebody cut us off, please. Like, was he a good carpenter?